When Skylanders was popular, I was already too old for it. I saw a cool looking box for a 3DS game and gave it a shot. Little did I know it would kickstart a mild interest in figure collection, continued briefly by Disney Infinity, and the yearly tradition of seeking out the Splatoon amiibo. I don't even own the game this figure is meant to be used for. If you clicked on this video, you most likely already know what a Skylanders is, but if you just happened to wake up after you left YouTube on autoplay, here's a quick rundown. Skylands is a world of floating islands in the sky, treading the fine line between full-on fantasy and steampunk. When the world of Skylands comes under threat of evildoers, Portal Masters must summon Skylanders,
roll credits,
to fight these villains and save the day. In the physical world, this translates to a video game being sold alongside a near-field communication scanner, and physical toys taking the place of playable characters, all but one of the Skylanders games completely lacking a character selection menu. The Portal Master was you, and you got to pick out the character through the one way I know the world works.
Hello, I like money.
Yes, you had to buy the physical figures to unlock them in the game, meaning that the full game would have always cost you more than the €60 you paid up front for the base game and the Portal. The Portal is the NFC scanner, by the way. Overall, the idea of Skylanders at its very core is not wholly original. The character the first game shipped with came from an established franchise, the idea of floating islands in the sky wasn't unheard of, and the beat-em-up style gameplay you have seen before, even if it was with a totally different setting and cast of characters. Yet, when you shout about Skylanders into the void that is the internet, you tend to get a lot of people who remember the games fondly, from people who would have been the target audience when the games came out, to people like myself who would have been too old even back then. Hell, even a colleague at a previous big boy job told me that he also played one of the games. And despite the series having been dead and buried since 2017, after 6 years people are still asking Activision for a new installment in the franchise. Whenever a big YouTuber mentions the series, they usually have few positive things to say, singling out the monetization and the overall sluggish nature of the games as reasons why the games aren't any good. But are these criticisms fair? That is what I intend to find out through playing the last ever mainline Skylanders game, Skylanders Imaginators. For this video I played the Nintendo Switch version, which by far is the most expensive version of the game if you, like me, intend to get it in the year of our Lord 2024 and beyond. Back in the day, Skylanders was something special. Even some of my older classmates played the games, and when they got bored of it, I bought their figures of them. Speaking of the figures, each installment of the franchise had its own signature toys. These signature toys are often referred to as Gimmicklanders in online circles. A term coined by Skylander Gamer TV, a Gimmick-lander is a Skylander which was made specifically for the gimmick for the game it was released for, being central to the incentive to buy them back in the day. This means that, as new games released and the roster got bigger, it made less and less sense to collect certain Skylanders from a gameplay point of view. The first game, Spyro's Adventure, didn't have any strict Gimmicklanders, as the gimmick of the first game was the actual concept of toys coming to life itself. Giants had the Giants, figures which were physically larger. In-game, they could hit harder and tank more damage, but as a consequence, they were the slowest character in the game. Swap Force had the Swap Force. The naming convention for these games is nothing outstanding. The Swap Force were figures which were separate tops and bottoms, quiet at the back, and could therefore swap these halves around to create dual-element Skylanders, with attacks from both the kits of two Skylanders. The Trap Team did more damage to villains with a bounty on their heads, and were the only Skylanders in their respective game which could open elemental gates, a feature which caused outcry even in 2014. Superchargers gave specific upgrades to specific vehicle figures introduced for that very entry in the series. And finally, Imaginators, the game, had two types of Gimmicklanders. The actual Imaginators, represented by these creation crystals, and the Senseis. The Senseis being the ones to grant your Imaginators more abilities and allow them to gain higher levels. When Spyro's Adventure came out, individual Skylanders costed about €7, or the equivalent in your currency of choice. Then, when Giants came along, regular figures became €10 and Giants were 15. But for those 15 coins, you did get a larger Skylander that even had LEDs in them. But with each successive game, the figures got larger and larger, to the point that it is generally the Trap Masters that are the largest figures. Look at my boy Thumbback. Next to a Trap Master, he looks tiny. The world of Skylanders is one of wonder and adventure. The islands look like a blend of World of Warcraft and Monster Hunter. Although straight-up magic exists, the power of steam and diesel has been harnessed, yet motor vehicles are a rarity. Elves, trolls, robots, and chipmunk creatures known as Mabu are the main inhabitants of Skylands, and the architecture of these races, whilst in stark contrast with one another, combine to create a very cosy world. Levels in any of the Skylanders games are generally structured around a format which anyone who has ever played a beat-em-up platformer can vaguely recognise. Move forward, beat up enemies, move forward, solve a puzzle, beat up enemies, move forward, boss fight in the form of a larger arena battle, or a classic 3-phase video game boss. I think that structure is what makes the console games such a comfort for many people even today. None of the games, bar perhaps Superchargers, straying from that format. Skylanders Imaginators is fundamentally just Skylander Spyro's Adventure but with better graphics and a larger cast of playable Skylanders. On the 3DS, all the games were structured in a specific 3DS way, but again, all are virtually the same game but with a different header. On the 3DS you're playing a time-based platformer, whereas on the consoles you play one of the video games of all time. Another overarching factor between the mainline Skylanders games is the villain, Chaos, spelt with a K. I find his lack of appearance in mainstream meme culture to be a bit jarring considering how many people have played the console Skylanders games, and because in the English dub he is voiced by Richard Stephen Horvitz of Invader Zim fame.
No more distractions, Gurr! Attack the human! This time on a dangerously high setting!
Yes! Then we can have super mega lasers! And a moat! Filled with hungry crocodiles! Ha!
In each of the games he appears in, Chaos generally wants to rule all of Skylands as your run-of-the-mill villain, though in 2 out of the 6 games he actually is playable, including Imaginators, and games allowing you to play as the villain in general are just really cool. The first game to have Chaos as a playable Skylander was Trap Team, where you could capture him using one of the titular traps, sold separately for $4.99. Trap Team was also the first appearance of the Skylander which carried me through most of my Imaginators playthrough, Dr. Crankcase. Crankcase dual wields a set of goo guns that don't travel far as they have to hit the ground for their secondary damaging effect to happen, but he shoots very fast and can knock opponents back should they come too close. His high rate of fire pairs well with his moderate movement speed, and this seems as good a time as any to tackle the big one. The one issue that anyone who has reviewed Skylanders in recent time drags the game through the mud for. Skylanders Imaginators is the slowest of all the Skylanders games, and outside the lens of a Skylanders game comes off as even more sluggish. Imaginators is a lot of set pieces with only minimal platforming for you to do between fights or puzzles. People who like Skylanders are pretty much used to it. Skylander Swap Force had levels which could last you an hour, but the levels had distinctly more stuff for you to do. This is all well and good, but the Skylanders themselves in Imaginators are also at least 10 times slower than they were in the rest of the series. And probably not because the developers actually slowed them down, just because the downtime between fights is so significant that you notice it a lot more. This issue bothers so many people that throughout the whole series, a fan favourite Skylander is one called Stealth Elf, whose main gameplay characteristic is speed. But the most insulting thing about this is that the developers knew that the base movement speed was too slow. You might wonder why. Well, in the hub world between levels, the characters are sped up tremendously, to the degree that characters with a bit of a waddle look like they're having a fit because they didn't just speed up the movement speed, they sped up the animation as well. If the developers knew Skylanders moved too slowly, why on earth did they only do something about it in the place that, arguably, it matters least? And again, slow movement is at least passable if the locales were at all interesting places to be, but sadly the levels feel empty and disjointed, outside of those mentioned set pieces. You've probably seen these 2 levels before. Every big YouTuber who has talked about Imaginators has featured them because they are the first levels in the game. Except, haha whoops, these are the same level. Unceremoniously, halfway through the first level, you fall through the floor and suddenly you are in this purple floaty platform space. That was very difficult to say, by the way. If you told me that the jungle level was the first level in the game and this purple space was in the endgame, I would have believed you without any question. Second level fares better, but as a village built on a river with heavy pirate influences, it can only do so much and seemingly reuses a lot of assets from previous riverside or pirate settings, even reusing music from Skylanders Giants. Safe from make badifications either. A fan favourite minigame in Skylanders Giants was Sky Stones, a card game where you have to cover as many squares of the board as possible, even taking over the squares of your opponent if your card has a higher damage. You had to either win cards through the matches you played, or you could buy them from the merchant hidden in each level, bringing another layer of deck building to the minigame, as well as requiring more exploration to actually find the merchant. Instead of bringing that whole feature back for Imaginators and bagging that easy win, Imaginators instead decides to make each game predetermined in your favour. Your opponent always just happens to have cards with a lower power rating than yours, and the cards on both sides are randomised. I understand we kids like to win with as little resistance from their opponent as possible, but if you leave challenge out of the equation altogether, Skylanders loses any depth it barely clung onto in the first place. Now, I realise that so far I've only described what Skylanders the franchise is, and as soon as I got to the subject of Imaginators gameplay, I had nothing positive to say. You have to understand that Skylanders games by and large really are all the same game anyway with a different header. There's only so many times you'd be willing to hear me describe the gameplay loop, and at the end of the day this video is only partially about Imaginators, but I would feel bad not mentioning at least a few things I really liked about the game. Since the Switch version of the game does not use a portal of power and instead requires you to load the Skylanders in permanently through the NFC reader on the controller, some brand new figures were made to complement the Skylanders hitherto only playable through the traps. The idea of getting to make your own Skylanders through the creation crystal is really cool, and although it was apparently really pricey back in 2017, you could get your Imaginators 3D printed and shipped to you. The only person I know for a fact to have done it also is a motherfucker. The Imaginator character creator is really deep, so much so that I could virtually recreate Kara, the channel mascot. Since Imaginators is seemingly under the impression whomever bought it already has a Skylanders collection, the purchasable Sensei Skylanders didn't offer any worthwhile advantage. Imaginators is a really pretty game, especially considering the roots of the series on the Nintendo Wii. Even in the 3DS versions of the game, if you wanted to play Skylanders away from home, you would have to bring a bag of your own Skylanders, which in general was always a very precarious affair, as most of my damaged Skylanders are damaged because they were in a bag filled with other sharp, pointy figures. The Switch version has you load your Skylanders in twice and boom, they're in your game forever. Unless you're using the initial release of the Minis figures, which do require you to load them in every single time, but that's neither here nor there. And in general, the Switch version having a character selection screen, you know, the very thing the Portal NFC scanners were to replace, does mean the Switch version is more like a traditional gaming experience. Where you used to have to pull the Portal and figures out of the cupboard, place the game in your console of choice and play, the Switch version really has you put in the cartridge and you're good to go, no faffing around. And whilst the Switch version of Imaginators runs worse than the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One versions, the irony of the one game which doesn't require you to interact with your figures for the whole Toys to Life gimmick being the best version to pick up and play isn't lost on me. And I think with me pointing that out, I have kind of inadvertently pointed out the biggest flaw of Skylanders as a franchise. It was all just a bit of a hassle to navigate. And ultimately, therein lies the biggest question revolving around the future of Skylanders. Could Skylanders still work as a current day release, as a Toys to Life game? Arguments made against the possibility of a Skylanders revival usually target the monetization, and the apparent waste a T2L game could amass through the figures which, after a while, don't get used anymore. The monetization of Skylanders, where you buy the starter pack including the main game and your first figures, with the option to purchase additional Skylanders should you like their looks and abilities, is often equated to predatory microtransactions. But I disagree. Games like Fortnite and Roblox might catch a lot of flack for being marketed towards children and featuring the ability to put real money down in order to change your appearance, whilst tapping into the human urge to be admired if only for your looks. Fortnite is the worst offender here because it generally creates whole new trailers just to show off what new cosmetics you can buy for the better part of €20, often even more than that. I know certain items in games like Fortnite and Overwatch can be earned through a season pass rather than directly bought, but considering said season pass can still be bypassed through real world money, we should not be pedantic about it and just see it for what it is, the ability to buy something you might eventually get. But the difference here for me is that with those games you pump money into your respective accounts, and the only thing you get are pixels on the screen, which, at the end of the day, can be taken away from you if the game ever shuts down or receives an overhaul update. Hell, Dauntless just did that very thing. But when I paid €7 for this Skylander, well, not technically this Skylander, this one came in the starter pack, I actually got something tangible which I could use inside of a video game. And I would argue Skylanders did the best job at it too, for the type of experience the developers wish to create. as the current largest player in the Toys to Life genre is Nintendo with their Amiibo, and their usability is a minor perk at best and negligible at worst. And whilst one day the Roblox or Fortnite servers will go down and all the money you spent on it will truly be a sunk cost, if all the Skylanders games suddenly suffered from extreme disk rot and were unplayable, I would still have my mementos from my time playing the game, in the form of these wee fellas. A bit like merch, but the merch actually served a purpose at one point. This brings me nicely onto the other thing brought up when discussing the possibility for a Skylanders return, and that is that the figures just take up space and create more, in due time, useless gaming accessories. Now, let me put that into perspective. As a lot of you may know, I have a model train collection, and I've built a layout for them to run on and get whatever use I could have out of them. But this layout will be broken up one day, as this is not my forever home. But when that happens, the locomotives in my collection suddenly not having a thing to do anymore does not render them without purpose, as I can still display them, as I fully intend to do so. With Skylanders, it could very much be the same thing, but on a smaller scale, price-wise. And hey, a Skylander would still always have had more functionality than one of those multiple $100 statues of your favourite video game woman. Or Rajang. The sexiest video game woman. That being said, I would certainly not disagree that there was a certain degree of bloat to the later games especially. Imaginators actually is the least offensive, as the creation crystals are completely unnecessary to 100% complete the game, but then there's Trap Team and Superchargers. Trap Team decided to upset 4 years worth of convention by adding the 9th and 10th elements, light and dark. This trap I'm showing off here being for the dark element. Not only is this a transparent attempt to sell more toys,
Hello, I like money.
in a game which already locked a lot of the completion behind purchasing at least one new trap master of each element,
Money!
but it also does not really make sense from a design point of view. Dark seems to both steal the undead element's thunder as well as just being another category for undead. Like, Hex, Rattleshake and Pit Boss are all undead element Skylanders, but Hex and Rattleshake only have a few skull projectiles and Pit Boss has nothing to do with death at all. So they're not as blatantly undead as some of the genuine skeletal Skylanders, of which there are a handful. But then Nightmare, the only Dark Element Trapmaster, also has nothing to do with death, and only has one ability which has a bit of relevance to creating darkness. At which point, why isn't she just an undead Skylander, you know? And then Superchargers had the vehicles ranging from land to sea to sky, but only the land vehicle is required to finish the game, and you got such a vehicle with the starter pack. Though, if you wanted to 100% the game, you would need at least one of each vehicle type. So at least the devs managed to persuade Activision that you don't have to make some toys basically requirements. Another argument which I could foresee people making is that T2L games, as a business strategy, revolve around selling you content that's already in the game's files from day one, and whilst I could argue you don't have to pay for that content if you don't like it, I will concede that that is the nature of T2L games. Another thing I know from people who work in retail is that Skylanders were always a pain, because they more often than not had a lot of displays, and due to their size, they took up a large amount of shelf space as was, and a lot of the time when people asked attendance for a Skylander, they asked for that specific Skylander by name, and not all the attendants knew the names of all the Skylanders, so there is that. But, to answer the very question I posed, do I think Skylanders could have a future as a Toys to Life game? No. Skylanders worked as a business model due to the circumstances we enjoyed a decade ago. People were, by and large, more willing to go into a game store in person to purchase a Skylander, whereas now, the last time I scheduled a trip to a game store was, like, the release of Splatoon 3 in 2022. Now, to compound the issue, a lot of game stores between then and now have simply gone, creating a downward spiral. People realise there's not a game store anywhere close to them, so they order online, which makes the store unable to compete with the convenience even more, and so on and so forth. Game companies themselves have realised this, and so try to make digital purchases as attractive as possible, nicely nickel and diming consumers with in-game purchases along the way.
That's rough, buddy.
You might be thinking, but this is Activision. Why wouldn't they take advantage of in-game purchases by locking playable Skylanders behind those? And you'd be right, but that doesn't make the game a Toys to Life experience, now does it? Sure, they could produce physical toys to serve as an optional purchase, but the odds of people then going out of their way to get the physical Skylander instead of the pure digital purchase aren't as good, and may even result in losses should the model fail to grab people's intrigue. And if I was to have purchased Imaginators purely based on reviews, Skylanders would not have intrigued me if I didn't already have a fondness for the franchise. But that is not a fun answer. So, disregarding the thought that a new Skylanders T2L release would be a massive risk for the game studio, let's have some fun. Should Skylanders want to return to the same thunderous applause it once enjoyed, it would need some major changes to acquire some goodwill back. Activision Blizzard is now owned by Microsoft, so if a new entry in the Skylanders franchise was to be announced, it would probably also be a PC title. Skylanders is no stranger to guest characters from other franchises. Donkey Kong, Bowser, Crash Bandicoot and Neo Cortex have all had their own appearance as playable Skylanders. Microsoft owns a lot of iconic games, so more collaborations between franchises would go a long way to entice people to pick up a few new Skylanders. Should Activision strictly want to stick to the T2L concept, making Skylanders figures out of characters like Tracer and Conker could be vital to catch the eyes of people who otherwise would never have given Skylanders a second glance. This way you could also appeal to people who just want a wee statue of their favourite Microsoft character. And it still feels so wrong to refer to Tracer as a Microsoft character. Oh. But if I may be so bold, implement a way to acquire at least a few playable Skylanders in-game. No real-world purchase required. The best way I could see this happening is like the LEGO games, where you encounter the characters in-game and then you buy them with the gold you earn through playing the game. You meet Stealth Elf in a cutscene and boom, now she's roaming the hub world and you can buy her. And actually, take a few more pages out of the LEGO games books. Make the game faster paced and give people more reason to replay the levels other than just the collectible trailers for new toys. Yes, those are the major collectibles in Skylanders. I'm not joking. Well, that's just me fantasizing. At the end of the day, I don't know what I'm talking about. I just think the world of Skylanders was neat and I am not a game designer. Skylanders was something special, hailing from a specific moment in time where such NFC technology could still wow people. If you've played the other Skylanders games but not Imaginators, it won't give you a satisfying conclusion to the franchise should you decide to pick the game up. And whilst I can understand YouTubers who have covered the Skylanders games from the outside looking in not enjoying it, I would certainly give another entry into the series a chance if it ever happened. If not, then it had a relatively graceful end with a creative yet underwhelming final entry. So long, Skylanders. And thanks for the memories. Also, Imaginators had genuine cosmetic loot boxes. I can't condone those. To at least attempt to quell the cries of clickbait, I did originally intend for this video to just be a one-to-one gameplay breakdown of Skylanders Imaginators. But in rewriting this video at least 4 times, that was lost somewhere along the way, and for the better I think. I find such videos quite boring myself. In a funny way, talking about the Skylanders franchise as a whole kind of goes to show why Imaginators is a really bad example of a Skylanders game, and Imaginators itself goes to show how Skylanders became complacent with its own concept. Now, whilst the idea of getting to make your own Skylanders through the creation crystals was actually quite deep, as I said, and very creative with what you're allowed to do, it does sort of both poetically serve as, you know, the final gimmick that they could think of, you know, now you make your own game. But simultaneously, it just kind of goes to show that maybe they were sort of running dry on ideas of how far they could stretch this concept. And it's funny because actually the Imaginators are, in my opinion, the best thing about Imaginators. For instance, the vehicles were not the best thing about Skylanders Superchargers, by a long shot. Now, to address the elephant in the room, yes, this video has been teased since 2022, I think in the New Year's video of that year. And like I said, I had to rewrite this video several times because I just was not happy with what I was able to put out. And it took so long and took so many rewrites that Team Fortress 2 got more lore before I could finish this video. And I actually mentioned a few dates early in the video where I say that, you know, people have been asking Activision Blizzard, I'm not going to do the swamp here, for 6 years for a new entry in the Skylanders franchise. Well, that was because I started writing this version of the script in 2023. So, that's why I'm a year off. A positive thing that the rewrites did bring along with them is that I kind of got to narrow down all the stuff that I wanted to really, really talk about. Like, I could talk about how the game just kind of ends. I could talk about how there's no level menu, at least I couldn't find a level menu, so I have to walk all the way through the hub world to get to the level, which is tedious as all hell. I could mention, why is this character that's only in the 3DS version of the first Spyro's Adventure game, why is he here? I could have mentioned all of that. Would any of that have mattered? No. So I think that with rewriting this video as many times as I've done, that I've actually managed to make a very concise video with all of my problems with the state of Skylanders, as it was back when Imaginators launched. Now the way the video looks is also, I'm not quite happy with that, but OBS and my capture card were just not agreeing with one another, which is why the resolution sometimes just absolutely dips, and it's why there is a lot of screen tear seen throughout the video. And I'm so glad that if you managed to watch it all the way through, I'm so sorry that you had to endure that. That was the best I could do, and no one's more annoyed at that than me, trust me. And all that's left for me to do is to thank a Spooky Peach for the thumbnail art and actually showing genuine interest in the video itself, and of course to you. Videos that are not even tangentially railway related on this channel are always a big risk, and YouTube likes to throw you off the deep end if they notice that you're making a video that's not inside your usual, what's the word, repertoire. So you managing to watch this video all the way to the debrief means a lot, and I can only say thank you very much. If this is the last video I upload before it's either Christmas or whatever other holidays that are coming up right now, happy holidays. I wish you all the best for the next year, and I hope that, I can do more sort of out of the blue stuff like this, but if you just want to see the train stuff, that's not going anywhere. So again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheerio!